Before we start this week's podcast, I want to ask a favour. Every year, Lloyd's List conducts an Outlook survey to test industry sentiment on the major issues shaping shipping. It's quick, I promise it'll take less than 3 minutes, but I would really appreciate it if Lloyd's List podcast listeners could complete it. There is a link in the podcast description or head to lloydslist.com for details. And if you want to get exclusive access to the results, join me in London on December the 5th at our annual Outlook Forum, where I will be joined by none other than Carrie Troth from Shell, Tanij Luthra from Zodiac Maritime, Andrea Olivi, the Global Head of Shipping at Trafigura, Michael Parker from Citi and Poseidon Principles, Nick Brown, Chief Executive of Lloyd's Register, and Johanna Christensen, Chief Executive of the Global Maritime Forum. It's very much the event of the season, and spaces are limited, but podcast listeners get first dibs, and you can register via the details at the end of the Outlook survey that you are all going to diligently fill out before listening to this week's episode. This week's episode of the podcast is sponsored by Lloyd's Register and Columbia Ship Management. The maritime industry is evolving faster than we often realise. Just a few years ago, high-frequency data collection was considered groundbreaking. Today, cloud-to-cloud connectivity and AI-powered optimisation platforms are a pretty normal part of operations, to be honest. Advanced vessel connectivity is scaling rapidly, and generative AI and machine learning are poised to accelerate those changes dramatically. Now, if you missed the previous episode of this podcast, I would suggest you hit pause at this point and go back to listen to the experts explaining what has happened, what is happening, and what will happen, because there is progress here. The industry is innovating faster than we often recognize, and this mini podcast series is partly about reflecting on how far we've come and where we might be heading next. But I didn't want to just focus on the tech and the widgets and the data and the AI. The bit we often miss in all this is the human intelligence. And to me, that's the more interesting part of this story. It's where the greatest opportunities lie, but it's also the biggest risk we face.
I think this is a human problem more than a technology problem.
That's Chiki Babisab, the Chief Technology Officer at Lloyd's Register, and we ended part 1 of this podcast with him talking about the transformational potential of artificial intelligence. But I want to focus more on the human intelligence for this episode, because whether we're talking about the way crew are factored into innovation discussions or the strategic boardroom decisions being taken ashore, we need to consider the psychology as well as the technology.
I think it's the lack of understanding of what technology can bring to the table. And the reason I say that is I attend several conferences for the maritime industry and ocean economies around the globe. And one of the interesting factors or common topics is how do you use technology to save 5% of the cost that you have today, rather than how to transform the way that we operate. And until that mindset changes, then the type of technological advances that you will look for is simply to implement a little bit of a better system so that I save a few cents for every nautical mile that I navigate, or that I save a few cents or some money from crewing, etc. But it's not really changing the way we operate. In addition to that, one of the biggest strengths of the maritime industry is also the biggest weakness they have when it comes to digitalization. And it is that most of the people that you find in shipping have been in shipping all their lives. And they're experts in shipping, and they're experts in ocean economies in general. But they have no way to understand how things can be done differently using technology. Because again, their biggest strength becomes a huge weakness for digitalization. They will tell technology leaders that, why would you want to change the way I operate if I know my business better than anyone else? I've done it for 25 years. And then that creates a difficult challenge unless it's completely a change that is pushed from top to bottom, which rarely happens because, again, the leaders of these maritime companies are also people who have been in those companies for 20 or 30 years.
I know it may sound a bit odd to focus on the human demographics of the industry in a conversation about innovation and technology, but that change of mindset that Chiki refers to there, it's important. It's important because these established leaders are the ones that are signing off the capex. But also, their thinking and willingness to think differently about how technology and people in their companies interact is ultimately what drives the innovation. The tech is probably the easy bit in all this. Here's Mark O'Neill, president of Columbia Ship Management.
No, you're absolutely right. And this comes again down to people. These are all people issues. Most of these big shipping companies are run by, or certainly were in the last generation, run by individuals that either came from the sea, the traditional captain that then built up the fleet, or scions of industry that built up the various large container lines. And these are individuals that run companies in a very pyramidical structure, and that you wouldn't necessarily see outside of the shipping space. And his or her, increasingly her, for all the right reasons, word was the word, and that's the way it is. And those individuals, for all the right and understandable reasons, become very blinkered and into believing that what they think is always right. The more we see, I think, the next generation coming into shipping and the breakdown of these traditional models, the more we see the liberalization of people and their ideas and the environment in which those ideas can flourish, you'll see true innovation really coming to terms. And you see some sparks of brilliance already. I mean, the shipping industry is incredibly creative, and that goes back to the whole adventure that it was back in the 1700s, and is still this adventurous spirit and very creative spirit. It just didn't have the environment to flourish because there was always someone above in a position of authority who knew better and probably stamped on it because it was change. But now that's changing, and I think the new generation is coming in, which gives a very fertile sector for innovation.
I know we're making a very general point here about generational thinking, and I promise this is not me being ageist. This is about how the people in the industry think about innovation and change. It's not just about the technology, as impressive as that is. It's about business models and new ways of thinking about how the industry adds value. It's a topic that I brought up last month when I was talking to Johanna Christensen, the chief executive of the Global Maritime Forum.
I think in terms of innovation, I probably look more to this, to the commercial side of things, the business model side of things. For us to succeed with the energy transition will require genuinely new ways of working in the sector, genuinely new commercial arrangements that, some of which may have been tried in other sectors or may have been applied in other sectors, but some of which genuinely have not. So from that point of view, I see that as true innovation. And it's not as, sexy as a piece of kit or something, or, some application of AI or what do I know. But I find that really interesting. And I find that, this is where there's such tremendous potential in my view.
This is a point I keep returning to in these conversations about innovation. Are we using technology to speed up existing processes and business models, or are we using the technology to create new ways of doing things?
Well, until we come up with a different business model where we kind of Uberize the industry, what we're looking at is in creating more efficiencies. Now, this is a very interesting question because, and this is an answer that I have given in several conferences and to our own executive team. Sometimes in the classification society world, classification society leaders worry about what the other classification is doing and how do we do it better. And all of them, including us, sometimes think in those terms. But what worries me as a Chief Technology and Innovation Officer is not what other classifications are doing, is what are some guys in a garage somewhere creating that will create a way to do the business that we do today in a completely different way that we haven't seen today, just like the taxi industry was Uberized in the past. What could happen and how could that potentially happen? So that's one of the scenarios that I'm continuously trying to evaluate And how can new generation technologies, as they develop, could become catalysts for that transformation? I have not yet found one that creates that risk, but I do believe that at some point that will happen. And what we want to do is, when that changes, we want to be part of that change, and we want to be helping drive that change. Now, interesting enough, if you look at what we have as a classification society, is we have data from thousands of surveys done on a monthly basis. Now, if you have that data properly connected with AI, you would be able to get predictions that humans would normally not be able to get. Now, imagine that you're able to identify a next generation problem that is caused either by new construction technologies, transition to future fuels, new engines, new AI systems in ships. Because while all of these things are done to solve some problems, they create new problems. Now, if we identify those new problems early on, we would be able to not just solve those problems and solve a problem for our customers and clients and partners, which is something important to us, but in addition to that, we create a new revenue stream for ourselves. So that is the kind of ways in which I see the most efficient use of technology and digitalization. We create new revenue streams, not by charging more, but by creating a lot more value to clients and customers.
So essentially, what Chakib is talking about there is monetizing the digital exhaust of shipping. Now, that's easier said than done when it comes to the technology. But again, we're back to the human decisions at play here. How do you convince a board of people that this next great idea of yours is going to have a return on investment, when half the time you're probably not sure yourself?
And the truth is that if you can't monetize it in one way or another, it just simply is not good enough. So, and of course, monetization comes in different ways, right? Qualitatively, quantitatively, but you need to be able to measure it somehow. And that brings the next big challenge in the industry: measurable results. Now, in order to use AI properly, you need to have certain level of data maturity. And to achieve certain level of data maturity, you need a certain level of investment. Now, when you speak with several people in the industry and you ask about investments to correct the data and to bring the data to a standard level where AI would be usable, the question that you will receive is, well, what is the ROI of that? And it's very difficult to answer, because how do you tell someone the ROI of using the internet, for example? We know data needs to be fixed, because by fixing data, you will be able to enable use cases in the future, not only the ones that you know today, but the ones that will come in the future in a much better, faster, and cheaper way, potentially giving you a competitive advantage because you can do it faster than the others. But fixing the data itself requires effort and money, and sometimes it's very complex for technology leaders to explain with a clear ROI to a board. Listen, you need to spend a few $1 million on this for something that will happen in the future. And that's one of the biggest challenges that companies face today, and why AI is not as widely used as it should, because the baseline, which is the data, is not ready.
It's not a new debate in shipping, I know, but this does inevitably always come back to the question of, why would I share my data with someone else? I want to look at how I monetize my digital exhaust. So we're back to psychology rather than technology. Here's Richard Buckley, who you may have heard in the first episode of this podcast. He's the CEO of 90% of Everything, a pioneer in digital technology for the shipping industry.
It's a fascinating question, because you said something there that made me smile. So you're absolutely right. They see their data as a profit center. But I would say today, more often than not, they see the underlying technology and the investment in external technology as a cost center. So we have this paradox where the investment in perhaps what would be modern technology
is constrained. I classically use the example, if you went to any shipping company and say, how much did you spend on technology for a ship? You tend to get the answer about $10,000 per year. Seems to be a fairly good norm. That is less than 1% of the cost of running a ship. So less than 1% of OPEX. If you look in any other industry, you talk 3-5% in heavy industry as an investment in underlying technology. So you have this interesting paradox where you're absolutely right. They believe their data has inherent value, but fundamentally, there's a resistance to invest in the technologies that not only capture that data, but also do the quality control of it and enrich it and generate the insights to do what I would love to happen, which is start to shift towards a value-driven conversation of technology. And that means, where can you prove ultimately it impacts the bottom line? And I don't just mean the bottom line economically, but perhaps with regards to environmental impact or safety impact. But I mean, where can you measurably make a difference on those three components? That then drives a value-based conversation about where you utilize technology and data.
Okay, so I said at the start of the episode that we would be talking about human intelligence, and while it's obviously partly a conversation about how CEOs and CTOs invest in that technology and think about their business strategy, I would argue that the more important end of this conversation is about how the rest of the industry interacts with technology and how that drives innovation. Here's Mark O'Neill again.
The real innovation, in my mind, stems from the increasing focus on the importance of people in our industry. I don't think technology or digitalization will be the differentiator between a good company, a medium company, and a bad company. I just simply don't see it. It's you can have a Ferrari. If you're a bad driver, you're still a bad driver. I see the main differentiator between those types of companies as the people, and people, and in that I mean leadership, I mean ability, I mean human interaction, communication, and these tools, the digital tools and the technologies are. They're very much the tail. The dog is what is important, and that's where we're focusing on. So I see this increasing focus on the importance of people as the innovation which is coming and needs to come even more.
All of which sounds nice and is a very valid point for the CEO of a ship management company to be making. But to the earlier points being made about technology developing in silos and that persistently fragmented nature of the innovation advances in shipping, Mark makes the important point that we need to factor in the way in which people are using technology as part of that strategic thinking. If we don't, we're just going to continue developing pockets of incremental change, and the true innovation will be missed.
I've always argued that the shipping industry, the shipping sector, is so ruthlessly competitive, going back hundreds of years, so ruthlessly competitive and fragmented that you don't get that joined up thinking, you don't get that joined up working that you get in other sectors. We recently, there's been a lot of publicity recently about Smart Sea. Smart Sea is this joint venture between CETA in the aircraft industry and initially Columbia in the maritime space, but will involve all other owners as equal shareholders eventually, where we're trying to get that joined up thinking. We're trying to get a backbone, an IT backbone across the industry, so you don't get this fragmented approach and these fragmented technologies that don't talk to each other. So what is innovation? You've just created another tool that only works for a small part of the industry and probably gives them an advantage until somebody else comes up with another tool that will work for another part of the industry, will give them. And so you're playing this small incremental moving forward, as opposed to something that looks at the sector more globally that other sectors are already doing. If you look at logistics, if you look at aircraft, if you look at trains, if you look at haulage, they're doing this already and they're light years ahead of us. And we're simply not able to do that. Now, the way this will happen is through people and people understanding that and putting aside areas of competition that we don't need to compete on, but it's ingrained in our DNA that we feel we have to, and actually looking at the bigger picture and saying, let's have something that pulls all these people together. Then let's get those people to a level that they can properly compete and participate on a much bigger stage. And then you've got some hope in preserving this sector, because unless this innovation takes place on a much bigger scale, my fear is that the shipping sector will simply be swallowed up, and quite rightfully and justifiably so, by other sectors that have got there way before us and are way more developed. And they say, do you know, enough of this. We're just simply we're either going to absorb it or we're going to create our own. And that's why you see these big logistics companies getting into shipping, because the frustration there. Why is the market going up and down like crazy all the time? Why are these people not using the same technologies? Why are they not using the same IT? Why do we have safety systems, hundreds of different types of safety systems? It just doesn't make sense to a more ordered approach that these other industries have. So that's where I see the innovation, and it's a big innovation, and it will start and end with the people. Once we get them up to a level so that they're able to actually comprehend this, then we have some hope in achieving those objectives.
Okay. That is where we're going to leave this specially extended double edition, but I want to return to AI as a topic in the new year. So if you have any thoughts on the issues that we raised in this mini-series on innovation, or indeed any of the other topics that we've covered in this podcast, do get in touch. You can find me on LinkedIn or come to me directly on richard.meade, that's MEADE, at lloydslistintelligence.com. We love hearing from our listeners, so all feedback welcome. And if you want to give me that feedback in person, I'll be hosting the annual Lloyd's List Outlook Forum in London on December the 5th at Trinity House. We have a stellar lineup, and it promises to be a great session. There are a few seats left, and I do stress only a few, so head to lloydslist.com or look in the podcast notes for details. But if you can't make it, don't worry. I will be bringing you some of the highlights in this very podcast after the event. You're welcome. So, for now, thank you to all my guests. Thank you to Columbia and Lloyd's Register for not just sponsoring, but taking a central role in what I think is a pretty important conversation. But also thank you for sponsoring. And thank you for listening. Goodbye.